In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this adorable ray of sunshine rainbow cake. And like always, my cakes are already baked, filled, iced, and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process, and that's all going to be linked in the description. And I will also let you know how much I charged. So let's get started. All right, I am putting this impression on the bottom tier. This is iced in American buttercream. You need to do this on a crusting buttercream so it doesn't stick to it. I do have a video where I go into detail on how I use impression mats on buttercream, and that will be linked below. But I go to the back of the cake, and then I start on the other side and work my way to the back because the pattern usually does not match up, and that way it doesn't match up in the back of the cake. Now I'm making the rainbow, so I rolled out this white fondant pretty thick, and all the colors are rolled out a little thinner. I do have Tylose powder mixed into all of my fondant, and it's going to help stiffen it up and make it easier to work with. I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method on here, so I'm tracing all of these ribbons onto the colored fondant, and then I'm going to cut them out. So I did measure my cake, and I made sure to print this picture out the size that I wanted it to be so it would fit on top of the cake. So I'm cutting all of these out. Anytime I cut anything out of fondant, I'm going to smooth it with my fingers to make it look nice and pretty. And then I aligned it on the white fondant first before I glued it down. So I just wanted to get it in the right position, and then I'm getting a little bit of water behind each piece and sticking it down. Now, if you look at the picture, there's a little bit of white in between all of the colors, and it's a little difficult to get it perfect, but I'm just using my spatula and my tools to try to space it out evenly. So again, getting a little bit of water behind it. That was a little too long, so I cut off the excess and just using my tools to make sure that everything is lined up. And again, after everything is glued down, I'm just using my spatula to make sure things are evenly spaced and looks nice and pretty. And then since this white fondant is a thicker piece of fondant, I need to make a guideline cut first, so I'm just sticking the tip of my knife into that fondant to create a guideline. And then once that's done, I'm going to stick the tip all the way down to the cutting board and cut this out. This way I'm not going to distort the piece when I cut it out. And then again, anytime I cut anything out of fondant, I need to smooth my cuts. So I flipped it upside down. This is going on top of the cake, so it needs to look pretty from the front and the back. And let's set that aside at room temperature to dry. Now I'm going to make the letters. I rolled that fondant out super thin. It's been sitting out for about an hour, and that way it's really stiff. I'm getting a little bit of Crisco in each of those letters that I'm going to be using, and I cut into little squares, and then I'm cutting all of these out. These are tappet cutters. The fondant has to be thin and stiff in order for these to work. I do have a video where I go into detail on how I use these, and I will link that in the description for you. Now I am making the little cloud border, so I'm rolling out this fondant using my fondant smoother to smooth it out. I cut a straight edge on the bottom and just make sure it's straight with my ruler. And then I need that to be about 3.5 inches tall. So I'm just lining the 3.5 inch at the bottom, making a dotted line, and then cutting it to make sure that I don't make it any taller than that. And then I'm just making a cloud pattern using my little wheel tool here, and I'm just going in different heights and different lengths and trying to make it look haphazard, if you will. And then I'm taking my X-Acto knife in the corners and cutting all of this out just to make sure that I get clean cuts, because that wheel is plastic. I usually don't get clean cuts with that. Now I have these sweet stamps, so I'm putting sunshine on here, so I took all the letters out, and I'm centering these in the middle of that fondant strip, and you have to press down really hard to make the impression. And what you want to do is connect the letters together. So I'm kind of overlapping the U with the tail of that S, and where the tail of the U is, I'm making the N start. So this way it looks like it's written in cursive. That H is continued through the S. Do you see what I mean? So it looks like it's all connected together. And then I like to take my Dresden tool and just continue any of those lines just to make it look like it's all one word. Got my cake out of the refrigerator, and I'm getting a little bit of water around the bottom part of the top tier. And then I'm starting in the very front of the cake and then wrapping this around to the back. That way that word is facing the very front. I'm cutting through both pieces in the back, and then where the seam is, just get a little bit more water down and press it down. Now I have some Rolcom Super Gold and a little bit of lemon extract. I'm going to mix that in this little cup here. I have those letters on a paper towel so I don't get this everywhere. And I'm painting this on here. I like to do 2 coats of the gold just to bring out the color, and that lemon extract, it dries really fast, so these don't stay wet for too long. And then I'm painting this with the gold. So I have a really tiny paintbrush. Do you see the head of that paintbrush, how I can really press it against there and it kind of glides through that letter? You have to have a paintbrush small enough to be able to do this, so it's not going to go outside of the imprints that you made. So I just keep dipping this back into that gold mixed with the lemon extract and painting all of this. So you just have to take your time and be really careful with it because, again, like I said, you don't want it to go on the outside of the imprints. And again, I did 2 coats because it just brings out the gold a little better. And now I want to measure, I'm wrapping the bottoms here. So I need to roll these out at least 28 inches long, and I want it to come up to the side of the cake. It needs to be at least 5 inches high. Do you see how I'm rolling it thinner on the ends and taller in the middle? That's how I need it to be. This will make sense as we go along. So I'm rolling this fondant out really long, cutting a straight edge on the bottom. And then I am just starting in the center, and I'm doing wavy lines coming down to the side on either side. And then again, start in the center, and then I'm just doing haphazard. There's no rhyme or reason to this, and just coming all the way down to the other side. Now I'm getting some water on the bottom tier. I'm getting it a little lower on the right side and higher on the left side. And then do you see how I rolled it up on either side? I'm starting on the left side and wrapping it around to the right, and then where it overlaps, I'm again just going to take my X-Acto knife, cut through both pieces, remove the piece in the back, and press it together. And just sealing that against the cake with my fondant smoother. Now I want the second piece to be a little lower than that piece, so I think I want it 4 inches tall there and like 1 1/3 inches tall on the other side or whatever. So I'm going to do the same process. So I'm rolling this out so it's thicker in the middle and thinner on the ends, and just rolling it out really long. And then I'm going to cut the straight edge on the very bottom. Take my ruler and make sure it was 3.5 inches. So I'm making the dotted line in the middle, just making sure that I don't go above that. And then on the edges, it was supposed to be like 1.5. So I'm starting in the middle. And again, I'm doing wavy lines coming down the one side, and I want to make it stop at that other line that I made. This way it's going to end below the other color that I put on there. And then now I want to put some Crisco on here. Crisco is a little more forgiving than water, so I'm going to be able to move that fondant piece into place once I get it on here. If I used water, it would stick right away and it would be difficult to move around. So again, I rolled up the edges, I curled in the sides, and then started on the left side and wrapped it around. And where it meets there, again, I'm just going to cut the excess. Nope, I'm going to take my thumb and press that all the way down to the bottom. And I could do that because I used Crisco shortening, and I can get it into the right place. Now I'm cutting through both pieces and creating that seam. And then I did the same thing for this other piece. I measured it. I only wanted it to be about 2 inches tall on the one side and about a 1/2 inch tall on the other side, and cutting the seam. And again, just taking my fondant smoother and making sure everything is adhered to the cake. Now I have some piping gel here. I want to get the letters on here, so I'm getting a little bit of piping gel behind here and sticking these letters down. These tiny letters are so hard to work with. They're kind of annoying. If I used tweezers, I would have distorted the letters because they're still a little soft. So I got them in place, and then I'm using the end of my paintbrush just to make sure everything looks nice and straight. And then I'm taking a dry paintbrush and just dusting off any of that excess cornstarch that was left on those pieces. And that looks really good. Let's put that back in the refrigerator. Now I rolled out some yellow fondant, kind of thick, and I just wanted to give it a rounded look to it. So I'm putting a piece of plastic really tight on the top and using my circle cutter to cut it out. And again, I'm just going to take my fingers and smooth my cuts. Now I'm taking my triangle cutter and I'm cutting the little rays here. So I'm cutting it on that piece that's already cut out. This way it's going to contour to the shape of that circle. And then I'm going to get a little bit of water underneath each piece and stick that down. I have that on a little cutting board. That way I can just set that aside for a day or two to dry. And now I'm making the clouds. So again, I rolled that fondant out a little thicker, and I'm having this plastic on here. I'm holding the plastic really tight and then pressing down. That way it's going to give like a little rounded look to the clouds. And then I have to smooth my cuts because these plastic cutters really don't cut that well. And then I'm thinning out this fondant in order to make the daisies. And I just like to put the cutter down. I cut around it so I have the right amount of fondant. And I take my thumbs and I press it down into it. And then I take like a little rolling pin and really press that down there to cut it out, and then press it against the counter, use my fingers to make that impression that's in that cutter, and then release it. So you can't just press these cutters down into the fondant and get clean cuts like this. I just find it so much easier to do it this way. So just cut the piece that's going to fit on there and use your fingers and tools to get the impression in there and get clean cuts. So for the big one, I did 2 big pinks and 1 small pink, and then all of the other colors, I have 2 of the smaller one.
And then I have this mold here for the center of the flowers, but first I'm getting a little bit of border behind this one petal, and I'm going to stick it down and make sure that the petals are staggered, and then I'm getting the smaller ones together as well. Do you see how I'm doing 2 of each, but the big one I have 2 big and 1 little one? I don't know, it's just the way that I felt like doing it. And then I'm getting a little bit of fondant in these little cavities, get a little bit of water behind it, and stick those down for the center of the flowers. Not sure if they still make this mold, but I could try to find something similar and link that in the description. And let's set those aside. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator, and I have a piping bag with like a tip number 4 and some yellow icing, and I'm just filling in all of these little impressions that I made. I kind of wish that I did a Swiss dot pattern instead of this one. I'm not crazy about it, but whatever, it's okay. Then you need to push in your points, because when you do that, you see how the points are sticking out? So I'm just wetting my paintbrush and just pushing all those points in. Just makes it look so much better when you take the time to do that. Now I'm screwing in 2 skewers in this white fondant. That's why I rolled out the white fondant a little thicker so they would stick in there without showing. Get some icing underneath that and press it down, and then any excess icing that's sticking out, I'm just taking my palette knife to remove it. You can use a dry paintbrush too. To hang the sun, I'm putting 2 toothpicks in here to anchor it like a picture, and then I'm going to get a little bit of icing behind the sun where it's going to be touching the cake and hook it onto those 2 toothpicks. That way it's not going to slide down. It's kind of like hanging on there. And then I decided to make the sun a little smaller because I thought it was a little too big, and then I did take some petal dust and outlined it just to give it a little dimension. Sorry I did that off camera. I totally forgot to film that. But now I'm getting a little bit of icing behind each one of these little flowers and sticking all of those down onto the cake. And I'm putting the clouds up here. I don't know what color I want in what position, so I'm just sticking them up there first. Getting a little bit of water behind each of these that I'm sticking to the cake. And then I decided to change the color, so I'm glad I didn't glue those down first. And then other ones, I'm getting a toothpick underneath, and this way they can stand on their own on the top of the cake. So I'm just doing that randomly and making sure that I also do it on the very back of the cake. And getting a little bit of icing behind that flower and sticking that down. And now I want to make some white daisies as well. These cutters are kind of a pain in the butt too. So you press it down to cut it out, but then you need a Dresden tool or something to pry this flower out of here. I find that the Dresden tool really doesn't distort the petals too much, so I like to use that. And I'm just like taking my fingers on each petal and just smoothing out my cuts. And these small ones are even more of a pain in the butt, but they do look good. So then getting a little bit of water behind each one and sticking these randomly around those little fondant waves that I made, and taking that icing bag and just filling in all of these centers with that yellow icing, and then pressing in the points with my wet paintbrush. And here is the cake. How cool is that?
So there you go. How adorable is this cake? This one was so much fun to make, and I love doing the rainbow this way because I've done quite a few cakes with rainbows on it. I'm sure you've seen them everywhere where they're coming down the side of the cake, and those rainbows are really cool, and I do love them, but this is just a different look, and I really like how it turned out. Now this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 3-layer not torted 6-inch, and the bottom tier is a 2-layer torted 8-inch. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and I will link that below. It feeds about 35 to 40 people. And how much did I charge? This one was $450. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my favorite recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, my best Dr. Cake Mix recipes, all of my buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked below. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. All of that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you are enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next. And hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.